Welcome to Life Stories, where we share the incredible power of kindness and how even the smallest gestures can change lives. Today's story is about Emily, a hardworking woman juggling two jobs to make ends meet, and a chance encounter with a man named Jack that transformed her life forever. What started as a simple act of kindness on a rainy day turned into an unexpected journey of gratitude, love, and hope. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories to join us for today's heartwarming tale. Let's begin this inspiring journey together. Emily lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of place where the noise of the city faded into quiet streets lined with humble homes. Her days were long, beginning with the early shift at a local diner and ending with a late-night job at a grocery store. Life was relentless, her schedule a constant cycle of work, exhaustion, and an unyielding need to keep going. The diner wasn't anything special, just a small neighborhood spot where regulars came for their morning coffee and eggs. Emily moved between the tables with quiet efficiency, offering kind smiles even when she was too tired to feel them. In the evenings, she clocked into the grocery store, stocking shelves and ringing up customers who rarely met her eyes. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent barely. Her apartment, though small, was her sanctuary. She had made it as cozy as she could, filling it with little touches of her personality, a shelf of second-hand books, a few potted plants on the windowsill, and a quilt her grandmother had given her years ago. It wasn't much, but it was home. One rainy afternoon, Emily was rushing between jobs, the cold drizzle turning into a steady downpour. Her old car, with its cracked windshield and squeaky brakes, felt like a lifeline and a burden all at once. As she drove through the grey streets, her thoughts were filled with the usual worries: rent, bills, and how she'd scrape together enough money to fix the heater before winter. As she approached an intersection, something caught her eye. A man in a wheelchair was sitting by the curb, struggling to move. His hands gripped the wheels, but the rain-soaked pavement made it nearly impossible for him to gain traction. His shoulders slumped with frustration, and his face showed the quiet despair of someone used to fighting battles on his own. Without a second thought, Emily slowed down and rolled down her window. "Do you need help?" she called out, her voice carrying over the patter of rain. The man looked up, startled. For a moment, his expression was guarded, as though he wasn't used to strangers offering kindness. I don't want to trouble you," he said hesitantly, his voice low. "It's no trouble," Emily insisted, offering a warm smile. "I'm heading that way anyway. Let me give you a ride." After a pause, he nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Emily parked her car, got out, and helped him into the passenger seat. He introduced himself as Jack, his voice soft but steady. She folded his wheelchair and placed it in the back seat, then got back into the car, her hands cold from the rain. The drive was quiet at first, the sound of rain tapping against the windows filling the silence. Emily stole a glance at Jack. He looked tired, his clothes damp and worn, but there was something resilient in his demeanor. "Where can I drop you off?" she asked gently. "The hospital," Jack replied, almost as if he didn't want to elaborate. Emily nodded and focused on the road. She didn't pry, sensing that Jack wasn't ready to share more. Instead, she made small talk, telling him about the diner and how the rain always seemed to slow business. Jack listened, nodding occasionally but saying little. When they reached the hospital, Emily helped Jack out of the car and unfolded his wheelchair. As she adjusted it for him, he looked at her with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Emily smiled. "Take care, Jack." She watched as he wheeled himself toward the entrance, the rainlight casting long shadows on the wet pavement. As she drove away, a strange warmth settled in her chest. It wasn't much, just a ride, but it felt meaningful. She thought about how easy it would have been to keep driving, to let someone else stop. But something about Jack had compelled her to act. That night, as Emily sat in her small apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She wondered about his life, why he had been alone in the rain, and what had brought him to the hospital. It wasn't her business, she reminded herself. But the thought lingered. Kindness had always been second nature to Emily, despite her own struggles. She found it hard to turn away from others in need. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to feel as though the world was moving on without you. Maybe that was why helping Jack had felt so significant. As she prepared for another long day ahead, Emily didn't realize that her small act of kindness would soon set off a chain of events that would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The next day began like any other. Emily woke early, the pale light of dawn filtering through the thin curtains of her small apartment. She made herself a quick cup of coffee and prepared for another long day of work. The memory of the previous day lingered in her mind, Jack's tired face, his quiet gratitude, but she pushed it aside. She had bills to pay and little time to dwell on strangers. By the time she returned home that evening, her body ached from hours on her feet. She was about to collapse onto her couch when a sharp knock at the door startled her. It wasn't the casual knock of a neighbor or a friend. This was precise, deliberate. When she opened the door, a man in a tailored suit stood before her, holding a sleek black briefcase. His face was serious but polite, his posture impeccable. "Ms. Emily Carter?" he asked. "Yes," she replied cautiously, her mind racing. She didn't know anyone who looked like this man, and the briefcase in his hand added an air of formality she wasn't used to. "My name is Richard Blake. I'm a lawyer," he said, stepping slightly into the doorway. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Jack Hayes." Emily froze. Jack? The man she had given a ride to the day before? Why would he send a lawyer to her apartment? Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not at all," Richard replied, his tone calm and measured. "Mr. Hayes asked me to deliver something to you personally. May I come in?" Emily hesitated but eventually stepped aside, motioning him into her small living room. She watched as he placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a soft click. From inside, he pulled out a cream-colored envelope, addressed to her in neat handwriting. "This is from Mr. Hayes," Richard said, handing her the envelope. "He requested that you open it now." Emily's hands trembled as she took the envelope. She glanced at Richard, who gave her a reassuring nod. Slowly, she tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Emily, I wanted to thank you for the kindness you showed me yesterday. You may not realize it, but your simple act of helping me meant more than I can express. For years, I've struggled with my disability, often feeling invisible in a world that seems to move too fast for people like me. But your gesture reminded me that there is still goodness and compassion in the world. As a token of my gratitude, I've left you something that I hope will ease your own burdens. It isn't just about the money, it's about recognizing the value of kindness and the power it has to change lives. Please use this in whatever way you see fit. With heartfelt thanks. Jack Hayes." Emily's eyes moved from the letter to the small check enclosed in the envelope. When she saw the amount, her breath caught in her throat. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Enough to pay off her rent, fix her car, and maybe even take a step back from one of her jobs. This can't be real," she murmured, looking up at Richard. "It's very real," Richard assured her. "Mr. Hayes has no close family, and he wanted to ensure that his gratitude was expressed in a way that would truly make a difference." Emily's mind raced. She thought about her bills, her car, her endless cycle of work and exhaustion. This money could change everything. But it didn't feel right. She barely knew Jack. How could she accept such a large gift? "I don't know if I can take this," she said, her voice shaky. "It's too much." Richard's expression softened. "Jack chose you for a reason. He saw something in you that many people overlook, a willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. This isn't just a gift. It's a recognition of who you are. Emily sat in silence, the check resting on the table in front of her. She thought about Jack, about his quiet gratitude and the way he had looked at her when she dropped him off at the hospital. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe this wasn't just about the money. I need time to think, she finally said. Of course. Richard replied, standing to leave. Take all the time you need. Jack simply wanted you to know how much your kindness meant to him. As the door closed behind him, Emily sat alone in her small apartment, the letter and check still in her hands. Her thoughts swirled with doubt, gratitude, and a deep sense of responsibility. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, just offered a ride to a man in need. But somehow, that single act had led to this. She stared at the letter again, rereading Jack's words. It wasn't just about the money, she realized. It was about the connection they had shared, however brief, and the reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could have far-reaching effects. For the first time in years, Emily felt the weight of her struggles begin to lift, not just because of the gift, but because of what it represented. The check sat on Emily's kitchen table for days, its presence both comforting and overwhelming. She couldn't bring herself to cash it. Not yet. Each time she looked at it, she thought of Jack and his quiet gratitude. She replayed their brief interaction in her mind, wondering how something so simple could lead to such a monumental gesture. Emily went about her usual routine, but the decision loomed over her. At work, she served coffee and scrambled eggs with the same quiet efficiency. But her mind wandered. Her co-workers noticed her distracted demeanor, but she brushed off their questions. The truth was, she wasn't sure what to do. By the weekend, Emily decided she needed answers. She wanted to understand more about Jack, about why he had chosen her for such a significant gift. She remembered the hospital where she had dropped him off and decided to go there. Maybe she could learn something that would help her make sense of everything. When she arrived at the hospital, the receptionist greeted her with a kind smile. I was wondering if you could tell me about a patient, Emily said hesitantly. His name is Jack Hayes. The receptionist's expression softened. Jack. He's been a patient here for years. A kind man. But very private. No family. Just a few close friends. He doesn't like to ask for help, so it's rare for someone to show up looking for him. Emily's heart ached at the thought. She had sensed Jack's pride and independence during their brief encounter, but hearing that he had no family made her gift from him feel even more significant. Is he here now? She asked. Yes, the receptionist replied. Would you like me to let him know you're here? Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, please. A few minutes later, she was led to Jack's room. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see him sitting by the window, his wheelchair angled toward the light. He looked up when she knocked softly. Emily, he said, a small smile forming on his face. I didn't expect to see you again. She stepped inside, suddenly unsure of what to say. I got your letter, she began, her voice trembling slightly. And the check. I didn't know what to do, so I thought I'd come and talk to you. Jack gestured for her to sit in the chair beside him. I'm glad you came. I was hoping you'd understand why I did it. Emily sat down, her hands folded nervously in her lap. I just don't know if I can accept it. It feels like too much. I only gave you a ride, it wasn't anything special. Jack's expression softened, his gaze steady. But to me, it was special. You stopped when no one else would. You didn't see a man in a wheelchair, you saw a person who needed help. That may not seem like much to you, but for someone like me, it means everything. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought of all the times she had felt invisible. Just another face in the crowd. Now, she realized Jack had been carrying that feeling for years, magnified by his struggles. You could have given this to anyone, she said quietly. Why me? Jack leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression contemplative. Because you reminded me of the person I used to be, before the accident. Before the wheelchair, I was someone who believed in people. You helped me see that again. And I wanted to give you something that could help you. The way you helped me." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Emily thought about her own struggles, the endless cycle of work and exhaustion. The nights spent worrying about how to make ends meet. Jack's gift wasn't just about money, it was about breaking free from that cycle. About finding a way to move forward. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally. Jack smiled gently. "You already have. Just promise me you'll use it to make your life better and maybe help someone else along the way." Emily nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. In that moment, she realized that accepting Jack's gift wasn't about taking charity. It was about honoring the connection they had shared and the kindness that had brought them together. When Emily left the hospital that day, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't expected. She decided to cash the check, not for herself alone, but to create a life where she could pay Jack's kindness forward. Over the next few months, Emily used the money to pay off her overdue rent, fix her aging car, and even take a few days off work to rest. But she didn't stop there. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping others who were struggling in ways she understood all too well. Every time she helped someone, she thought of Jack and the impact of his gesture. It wasn't just about the money, it was about believing in the goodness of people and the power of kindness to change lives. Months passed, and Emily's life began to transform in ways she had never imagined. The money Jack had given her didn't just help her survive, it gave her the chance to rebuild. For the first time in years, she could breathe. Her car no longer broke down every few weeks. Her rent was paid on time, and she even found the courage to leave one of her jobs to focus on a single steady income. But what mattered most was the sense of purpose she discovered. Inspired by Jack's kindness, Emily started volunteering at the local community center every weekend. She helped distribute food to families in need, organized clothing drives, and even mentored young women struggling to find their way. It felt good to give back, to extend the same compassion that had been shown to her. One sunny afternoon, as Emily worked at the community center, she received a call from Richard Blake. The familiar weight of emotion filled her chest as she answered, wondering what news he might bring this time. "Emily," Richard began, his tone calm but tinged with something deeper. "Jack has made another decision. He's left something else for you." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "He owned a small house not far from your apartment. It's modest but comfortable. Jack wanted you to have it as a way to truly start fresh." Emily sat down, her hand clutching her phone tightly. A house. She could hardly believe it. The idea of having a permanent place to call her own was something she had never dared to dream of. "Why would he do this?" she asked softly, her voice cracking. "Jack saw something special in you," Richard replied. "He wanted to give you the chance to build a life where you could thrive, not just survive." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she listened. She didn't know how to express the gratitude swelling inside her. Over the next few weeks, Emily moved into the house Jack had left her. It wasn't large, but it was filled with potential. She painted the walls, planted flowers in the front yard, and decorated each room with care. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of stability, a place where she could grow and dream. Emily also made a promise to herself. Jack's kindness would not end with her. She continued her work at the community center, started a neighborhood support group, and became a mentor to others facing challenges similar to her own. She wanted to honor Jack's memory by ensuring his generosity rippled outward, touching as many lives as possible. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her new home, Emily looked up at the stars. She thought about Jack, his quiet strength, his generosity, and the connection they had shared. It amazed her how one small act of kindness on a rainy afternoon had changed both their lives forever. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. Jack had given her more than a house or financial security. He had reminded her of the power of compassion and the importance of seeing people, not just their struggles. but their humanity. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more heartwarming tales. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments. See you in the next video.